She tapped on my window before I even finished parking. White polo shirt, HOA lanyard, card reader already in her hand, angled toward me like this was a toll booth. Day pass is $15, she said, cash or card. I looked past her at the sign mounted on the post near the entrance. $15 day access, $180 season pass, $25 boat launch, and then at the gatehouse sitting at the head of the gravel road, and then at the boom gate holding back the entrance to 5,000 acres that had my name on the title. I don't need a pass, I said. This is my property. She looked at me the way a teacher looks at a student who has just said something both wrong and embarrassing. This is an HOA-managed community amenity. It does not belong to any individual. She pushed the card reader forward an inch. When I didn't reach for it, she stepped back and produced a clipboard. If you don't comply, I will issue a trespassing notice and contact the county sheriff's department. The HOA has a standing agreement with them. Said it the way someone reads from a script they've committed to memory. Calm, practiced. She had said those words before and watched people fold. She had no idea what was in the envelope in my glove compartment. I'd driven 3 hours that morning, straight from my attorney's office. The property had cleared probate 6 weeks earlier. A 5,000-acre parcel, including the reservoir and all surrounding land, transferred to me by right of inheritance, clean title, no liens, no encumbrances of any kind. My grandfather bought it in 1971. He paid property taxes on it every year until the year he died. After that, I did. And someone had built a gatehouse on it. Not a sign, not a fence, a structure. Wood-framed, with a sliding window for cash transactions, an electronic boom gate, and a card reader for contactless payment. A small commercial operation at the entrance to my land. And based on the line of vehicles I'd counted on the way in, they'd been running it all morning. 11 cars through the gate in under 20 minutes, each one pausing at the window, each one handing over money, each one continuing toward the water without a second thought. I had been counting. I didn't argue. I didn't wave the deed in her face. I rolled my window up, pulled to the side, got out of the car, and started taking photographs. The fee sign, every line, every price. The gatehouse and its poured concrete foundation, the boom gate with its electronic housing, the card reader, the vehicles in line. And then, through the glass of the gatehouse window, something taped to the inside. A laminated document, one full page, the kind of thing someone had taken time to print and mount properly. I could read the header from where I stood. HOA Operating Agreement for Lakefront Amenity Management. I couldn't make out the body text at that distance. I photographed it through the glass anyway. Then I stood there and looked at it for a moment longer than I needed to. The fee sign, the gatehouse, the operating agreement in the window. 3 things, all on record. That was when she walked back over. You need to stop photographing HOA property, she said. I lowered my phone. This isn't HOA property. She gave me the same look as before, patient, certain, faintly irritated. This reservoir has been under HOA management since before you were born. That is not going to change because some heir decided to show up and make trouble. Heir. Not neighbor, not owner, heir, which meant she had done her research before I arrived. She knew my name. She knew the inheritance had gone through. She had anticipated this exact moment and decided the correct response was to station herself at the entrance to my grandfather's land with a card reader and a trespassing notice and see if I would blink. She called me some heir, like it was a dismissal, like the fact that the land came to me through family rather than a purchase made it somehow less mine. What she didn't know was that the deed in that glove compartment covered every inch of that reservoir, every foot of those 5,000 acres, and had for 3 generations, with no recorded easement, no deed restriction, and no legal instrument of any kind granting the HOA the right to run a business on it. Not one. I put my phone in my pocket. My attorney will be in touch, I said. Have a good afternoon. I got back in the car, sat for a moment. Through the gap in the tree line, I could see the water. 300 yards of blue-gray reservoir, a dock, a roped swim area with orange buoys, a boat ramp on the north bank. Families already settled along the shore. Coolers, lawn chairs, kids in the water. All of them on my land. All of them paying someone else for the privilege. I had counted 11 vehicles in under 20 minutes, each one paying $15 to access water that was legally mine. If the HOA had any idea what was sitting in the envelope in my glove compartment, they would not have handed me that trespassing notice. That evening, I spread everything out on my kitchen table. The deed first, 5,000 acres, the reservoir and all surrounding land, unbroken chain of title going back to 1971, my name on every relevant line. Then 40 years of property tax receipts, my grandfather's handwriting on the envelopes, each one paid and filed without complaint. Then the survey map, the county assessor's parcel records. No easement, no deed restriction, no covenant in the original subdivision documents granting the HOA rights over the water. Not one recorded instrument tying the HOA to that land in any legal capacity. The title was clean. The problem was that someone had been running a business on it for 30 years. My grandfather was methodical. He kept everything. 8 filing boxes organized by year, handed to me by the estate attorney along with the deed. I went through them that same night, looking for anything that explained how this had started. I found it in a folder labeled HOA correspondence. One letter, dated March 1994, HOA letterhead, signed by someone who was apparently board president at the time, a name I didn't recognize. 3 paragraphs. The first thanked my grandfather for his long-standing commitment to community development. The second informed him that the board had begun improvements to the community's lakefront access area, including a dock extension and designated swimming zone. The third said the board was grateful for his continued cooperation with these community enhancement efforts. That was it. No request for permission, no mention of fees, no signature line for the property owner, no acknowledgement that the land in question belonged to him. My grandfather never responded in writing. I checked twice. Nothing in the outgoing correspondence, no signed agreement, no formal objection either. 30 years of assumed permission, built on one letter and one man's silence. The following morning, I called a property attorney I'd worked with before on a different matter. I read her the deed language and described what I'd found in the HOA files. She was quiet for a moment. What they're counting on, she said, is called prescriptive easement. Use someone else's land openly and continuously for long enough without their consent, and you can claim a legal right to keep using it. She paused. The threshold in this state is 10 years. They've been there 30. So they have a case. They think they have the case. Whether they actually do depends entirely on what without permission means, and that 1994 letter you found matters more than they probably realize. I made an appointment to see her the following week. In the meantime, I had a visit to make. Mr. Patterson had lived in the community for 25 years. 72 years old, retired civil engineer, the kind of man who knows the names of everyone on his street and can tell you exactly when the stop sign on the corner was installed. His wife brought out coffee before I'd finished introducing myself at the door. I asked him what he remembered about the Reservoir arrangement and when it started. He thought about it for a moment. Your grandfather brought it up once at a meeting, he said. This was years ago, maybe 2003 or 2004. He said something about people using the water access, and he wasn't sure what the arrangement was. What did the board say? Mr. Patterson set down his cup. They told him the HOA was managing the lakefront as a liability service, that it was in his interest to have the board overseeing it, insurance, safety, maintenance. He seemed to accept that. A pause. I don't think anyone told him they were charging people to get in. I thanked him and walked back to my car. Nobody told my grandfather they were charging for access to his water. And nobody asked him if that was all right. The current board president had held her position for 15 years. The board member who originally adopted the Reservoir back in the early 90s had retired years before she took over. She hadn't built this operation. She had simply continued it. Whether she ever looked into the legal basis for doing so was unclear to me at that point. Whether she chose not to look was a different question entirely. That night, I pulled up the HOA's publicly filed 990 tax returns. Nonprofit status in most states means those filings are public record, available to anyone willing to look. What I found was a line item that appeared every single year without exception. Recreational amenity revenue? The last 10 years of filings alone, $340,000 in declared revenue from that single line. The years before the digital filings were harder to trace. But running conservative estimates, lower fee schedules in the early years, smaller visitor numbers. Put the 30-year total somewhere between $600,000 and $900,000, extracted from water that belonged to my grandfather, and now to me, without a contract, without a recorded easement, without a single legal instrument authorizing any of it. I sent a formal written notice to the HOA that Friday. I identified myself as the legal owner of the parcel, requested a complete financial accounting of all reservoir-related revenue since operations began, and stated clearly that I was reviewing the legal basis for the HOA's presence on my land. 24 hours later, I had a response, not the records, a letter from the HOA's attorney. It informed me I had no standing to demand internal HOA financial documentation, that the HOA's operations at the lakefront were legally established and protected, and that any interference with HOA amenity access could expose me to legal liability. No records, just a lawyer. They'd responded in less than a day, which told me exactly how prepared they already were for this conversation, and exactly how much they understood was at stake. She had been waiting for me to show up. Saturday morning, I drove back to the Reservoir. This time, I had a printed copy of the deed's cover page. Name, parcel number, acreage, county recording stamp, folded in my jacket pocket. My phone was already running voice memo before I got out of the car. The gatehouse was operating at full capacity. The line of vehicles stretched past the welcome post. Families with coolers and kayaks, weekend visitors content to pay their $15. The boom gate lifted and dropped in a steady rhythm. Commerce on my land on a Saturday morning like it was the most natural thing in the world. Karen was there. She saw me pull in. I watched her posture change. I walked to the front of the gatehouse and waited. She came over eventually, took her time about it. I think we made our position clear on Wednesday, she said. I want to make sure mine is equally clear. I unfolded the deed cover page and held it out to her. Name, parcel number, 5,000 acres, county recording stamp. I am the legal owner of this property. Everything operating on this land, the gatehouse, the gate, the dock, the fees, is operating without my authorization. She took the paper, looked at it for approximately 2 seconds, handed it back. Whatever your grandfather may have thought about ownership, the HOA has operated this amenity for decades. Our legal team has confirmed our rights are established. She did not say established under which law. She did not say established by which instrument. She said our legal team the way people say it when they want the conversation to stop. I was still holding the deed page out. She didn't take it again, so it stayed in my hand. Her refusal to acknowledge a recorded legal document on record in front of the gatehouse on a Saturday morning. She turned and gave a brief nod toward 2 men standing near the entrance. HOA polo shirts, lanyards, the look of people who had been waiting for a reason to be useful. They moved forward and positioned themselves between me and the gatehouse door. The taller one told me I was creating a disruption. He said if I didn't step back from the access area, they would contact the county sheriff's department. I did not step back. I pressed record on my phone. That was when Karen turned to face the line of waiting vehicles. There were 40 people within earshot, probably more. Families holding towels, kids sitting on the hoods of cars, a man near the front with 2 young daughters who had already started watching. She raised her voice, deliberately. This gentleman is attempting to claim individual ownership of a community amenity. She was performing now for the audience she had selected. We've seen this type of opportunistic action before. The HOA is fully prepared to defend the community's rights against this kind of challenge. Nobody in line said anything. A few pulled out phones. A woman near the back leaned over to say something to her husband. The man with the 2 daughters quietly moved them a step behind him. Karen was looking at the crowd when she said it, not at me. She was measuring them. I waited until she finished. Then I said, quietly, clearly, loud enough for 40 people to hear just as well as they'd heard her, I have the deed. My attorney will be in touch. Have a good Saturday. I walked back to my car. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue the law in a parking lot. I didn't explain myself to the families who had just watched a woman call me an opportunist on my own land. What I did do was check my phone before I started the engine. The recording was clean, every word. Karen had publicly characterized me, in front of 40 witnesses, as someone engaged in opportunistic action against a community amenity. What she hadn't understood was that she had done it on a recorded device, in front of 40 people who were eventually going to have questions of their own about where 30 years of lakefront fees had actually gone. She built her audience. I kept mine for later. That evening, a certified letter arrived from the HOA's attorney. 12 pages, law firm letterhead, heavy stock paper. I made coffee and sat down with it. The letter asserted the HOA held operational rights to the reservoir by long-standing community agreement and established use. It warned that any interference with HOA amenity operations would result in the HOA pursuing injunctive relief and monetary damages against me personally. 3 statutes cited, 2 case precedents referenced. It was built to look like a wall. I read it once straight through, then again, then a 3rd time, slowly, starting from page 1. The 3rd time through, I got to page 7. There was a sentence there, written by the HOA's own attorney, in a document their own attorney signed and filed, that I read twice more on its own, separate from everything around it. Then I set down the letter, picked up a pen, and circled it. 1 sentence written by the people whose entire job was to protect the HOA's position, and it was going to cost them everything they thought they had built. My attorney called me on Monday morning before I'd finished my first coffee. I've read the demand letter, she said, all 12 pages, and I need you to sit down with me this week because there's something in here they should not have written. I was at her office by Wednesday afternoon. She had the deed, the HOA bylaws, the original subdivision plat, the county's recorded documents, and the demand letter spread across her conference table in separate stacks, the kind of organized chaos that means someone has been working on something for a while. She walked me through the legal landscape first, quickly. The HOA's entire position rested on adverse possession. To claim it, she explained, the use had to meet a specific standard. Open, continuous, and above all hostile, meaning without the owner's permission. Hostile in the legal sense doesn't mean aggressive. It means the person using the land did so without the owner's consent. That's their whole argument, she said. 30 years of open, continuous, hostile use, and they timed it almost exactly. Then she turned to page 7 of the demand letter. She read the sentence aloud. The HOA's own attorney had written that the original landowner, my grandfather, had been informed of and consented to the arrangement in a spirit of community goodwill. My attorney set the letter down. If the owner gave consent, she said, then the use was permissive, and permissive use cannot become adverse possession. It doesn't matter how long it goes on. Their own filing just eliminated the one legal argument they had. She tapped the page. Their attorney destroyed their case in the document they sent to threaten you. I looked at the circled sentence for a moment. Then I asked her what our next step was. Start gathering everything you can, she said, because they're going to file before we do. I went to see Mr. Patterson that same afternoon. He was in his garage when I pulled up, puttering with something on a workbench, the kind of productive retirement activity that fills quiet weekday hours. He waved me in before I'd finished parking. We sat in folding chairs near the back wall. His wife brought iced tea without being asked. That detail stayed with me, the kind of house where visitors are simply expected to be taken care of. I told him what I'd found, not the legal strategy, just the facts. The deed, the 1994 letter, the 990 filings. The 30 years of revenue extracted from land that had never legally belonged to the HOA. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up, walked to the far corner of the garage, and came back carrying a shoebox. He set it on the workbench and lifted the lid. 25 years of HOA annual statements, organized by year. He had kept every one. The tabs were handwritten, 2000, 2001, 2002, all the way forward. He pulled one from near the middle and handed it to me. There it was on the itemized statement, its own line, distinct from general dues and maintenance assessments. Lakefront amenity fee, $165. He pulled out 3 more at random, different years, the same line, $150 in the early ones, $175, $180 in the most recent. I paid it every year, he said. Never thought to question it. I thought it went to keeping the dock up, the swim buoys, whatever they needed out there. I did the math in my head, then on the back of a sheet from his workbench notepad. 200 households, average fee of $180 per year across the full 30 years. That was just the annual assessment, not the daily passes, not the season passes, not the boat launch fees, not the event rentals listed under a separate category in the 9990 filings. Conservative total across 3 decades, $680,000, possibly more in the years before online records made the numbers easy to trace. $680,000, collected from residents to access water that was never the HOA's to sell. Mr. Patterson watched me write the number down. So the HOA was charging us, he said slowly, for 30 years to use water that wasn't theirs to charge us for. I looked up. That's what the deed says, I told him. He stared at the shoebox for a moment. When he looked back at me, the expression on his face was not anger exactly. It was something quieter than that. The feeling of realizing that something you'd accepted without question for 25 years had never been what you thought it was. What do you need from me? He asked. I told him. He agreed without hesitating. 25 years of payment records available for any legal proceeding that required them. His wife, who had appeared in the doorway at some point during the conversation, nodded once. Whatever you need, she said. I didn't organize anything after that. I didn't call a meeting or post anything or reach out to other households. I drove home and added Mr. Patterson's statement to the file. But he mentioned the conversation to a neighbor that evening, and that neighbor mentioned it to someone else the following day. The question that started moving through the community was quiet, and it was specific, not who is this man claiming ownership. That framing had been Karen's, and it was already losing its grip. The question that was actually spreading was simpler than that. Where did the lakefront money actually go? The certified mail arrived on a Thursday morning. Not from the HOA's attorney this time, from the county court clerk's office. I stood at my mailbox and read the return address twice before I opened it. The HOA had filed a formal adverse possession claim. They were asking the court to recognize their operational rights over the reservoir as legally permanent. 30-plus years of open, continuous, hostile use, they argued, had entitled them to what no recorded instrument had ever given them. If the court agreed, I would own the land on paper. I would pay taxes on it. I could not exclude anyone from it. The HOA would keep running their operation indefinitely on my grandfather's water, with a court order behind them instead of just a bluff. This was no longer a letter from a lawyer, this was a lawsuit. The second envelope arrived 2 days later. The HOA board had voted, unanimously, according to the attached meeting minutes, to place a protective lien on my property. The stated basis, $4,200 in outstanding community maintenance assessments, owed by the new property owner for reservoir upkeep dating back to the date of inheritance. I read that twice as well. There were no such assessments. There was no legal basis for any such claim. I was not a member of the HOA. The property was not subject to HOA jurisdiction. The assessment had been manufactured, filed with the county recorder, and attached to my title, which meant that until it was removed, it clouded every transaction involving the land. No clean sale, no refinancing, no clear title. A fraudulent lien, filed against property they were simultaneously suing to claim. They were trying to freeze me in place while the lawsuit ran. 3 days after the lien notice, Karen sent a written letter to all 200 households in the community. She did not name me directly. She used my property address. The letter described an ongoing legal challenge by an external party seeking to privatize the community's lakefront access. It characterized the adverse possession filing as a protective measure taken on behalf of residents. It closed with a paragraph about the board's commitment to preserving community rights and asked residents to remain united during this period of uncertainty. 200 households. Most of them had no idea there had ever been a question about who owned the water. Now they had a letter telling them someone was trying to take it away from them, framed exactly that way, in exactly those words. I set the letter on the table next to the court filing and the lien notice, and I sat with all 3 of them for a while. Then I made 3 phone calls. The first was to my attorney. She had already seen the filing. She was already drafting the motion to void the lien. Fraudulent encumbrance on title, no legal basis, sanctions potentially available against the filing party. We'll have it removed, she said, and when we do, we'll ask for fees. The second call was to the county assessor's office. I submitted a records request, public information available to anyone, for every building permit filed against the reservoir parcel going back to 1990, every structure, every modification, every recorded county authorization for construction on that specific piece of land. The third call was to my attorney again to tell her to begin drafting our counterclaim. The permit records came back inside a week. I sat down at my kitchen table with the printout and went through it line by line. The gatehouse, no permit on file. The dock, no permit on file. The boat ramp, no permit on file. Storage shed, north bank, west side, no permit on file. Storage shed, north bank, east side, no permit on file. Every structure the HOA had built on my grandfather's land, every physical thing they had pointed to as evidence of their decades of management and investment, had been constructed without county authorization, on private property they didn't own, without a permit, without inspection, without a single recorded approval from the county that would have required them to first establish they had the right to build there. I read the list a second time, more slowly. Under county code, unpermitted structures built on someone else's land are classified as encroachments. Encroachments are subject to mandatory removal. The cost of that removal falls on the party responsible for the encroachment. 5 structures, every one of them built without a permit, every one of them on my land. The HOA had filed a lawsuit to make 30 years of trespassing permanent. What they didn't know was that the same county database that contained their court filing also contained the permit history for that parcel, and that history was completely empty. Not one valid building permit, not for the gatehouse they've been collecting cash from since the 90s, not for the dock, not for the boat ramp, not for either of the storage sheds sitting on my grandfather's north bank. They had just handed me the demolition order for their own operation. I didn't call anyone that night. I made dinner, washed the dishes, and went to bed at a reasonable hour. There are moments when the right move is simply to let the other side keep building their case against themselves. This was one of those moments. The notice arrived by email and by physical mail simultaneously, which told me it had been prepared carefully. Emergency community meeting, reservoir access crisis and legal defense. Mandatory attendance requested of all household representatives. This Thursday, 7 p.m., community center. Mandatory, not requested, not encouraged, mandatory. I RSVP'd for one. The community center held maybe 250 people at capacity. By 10 minutes before 7, it was close to full. I arrived early and took a seat in the back row, 3rd chair from the left wall. My attorney sat beside me. Mr. Patterson found us 5 minutes later and settled in 2 seats down, his wife beside him. He had brought a folder. Karen stood at the front of the room behind a folding table with a projector screen behind her. 2 board members flanked her. HOA counsel was positioned near the side wall, yellow legal pad open, pen already moving. She had prepared visual materials, printed boards on easels, photographs of the reservoir across the decades, the dock in various stages of construction, the swim area with its orange buoys, the boat ramp on the north bank, families at the water, children in life jackets, a community thriving. She had organized 30 years of images into a timeline that told one story and only one story. The HOA built this. The HOA maintained this. The HOA gave this to you. She opened at exactly 7 o'clock. Thank you all for being here, she said. I'll be direct. Our community is facing a legal challenge to our lakefront access. An individual has filed claims against the HOA's established management rights, and we have responded with the full force of our legal resources. She spoke for 12 minutes without pausing for questions. She described the adverse possession filing in terms that made it sound like a shield rather than a sword. She used the phrase protecting our community 4 times. She referenced the HOA's 30-year investment in the lakefront. She did not mention where the money for that investment had come from, or what had been charged to access it, or who had originally owned the land it sat on. When she finished, she smiled with the confidence of someone who had rehearsed this and found it adequate. Our legal team is confident, she said. The community's access to the lakefront has never been more secure. The room responded with the kind of applause that happens when people aren't sure what else to do. The first question came from a woman near the front, mid-30s, 2 children beside her, the kind of person who takes notes at school board meetings. I've been paying the lakefront amenity fee for 4 years, she said. Can you explain where that money goes? I've never seen an itemized breakdown. Karen's smile didn't change. All amenity revenue is reinvested directly into lakefront maintenance and operations. This is standard HOA practice and fully consistent with our bylaws. The woman wrote something down. Then from the back of the room, 3 rows ahead of me, Mr. Patterson raised his hand. Karen saw him. Something in her posture shifted. Almost nothing, just a degree, but I was watching for it. I've been a member of this community for 25 years, he said. His voice was steady, the kind of steady that comes from not being angry, but simply being certain. 6 weeks ago, I submitted a written financial records request. Member dues, amenity revenue, expenditures related to the lakefront. Under state law, members in good standing are entitled to that documentation within 30 days. He paused. I haven't received a response. The room went quiet in a different way than it had been quiet before. Financial records are available upon request through the appropriate administrative channels, Karen said. Any outstanding requests will be addressed following resolution of the current legal matter. That was the appropriate channel, Mr. Patterson said. I used it 30 days ago. Karen moved to open the floor for other questions. But 3 more hands went up before she could redirect. 3 different households, 3 different voices. Each one said a version of the same thing. They had also submitted financial records requests in the past 2 months, and none of them had received a response. 4 requests, 4 silences. Karen called for a procedural vote. She moved to authorize continued legal defense expenditure, a specific dollar amount drawn from the HOA reserve fund, and simultaneously moved to table all financial record inquiries until after the legal proceedings concluded. Both motions packaged together, 1 vote, which meant anyone who opposed the financial transparency motion also appeared to be voting against the community's legal defense. It was a clean move. I noted it. The vote, 141 in favor, 31 opposed, 28 abstentions. Karen thanked the community for their unity. She stated that any individual interference with HOA operations would be reported to law enforcement. She looked at the back of the room when she said it. The applause this time was smaller. I did not speak not once the entire evening. I counted instead. 31 households had voted against the motion. 28 more had declined to vote at all. That was 59 households, nearly a third of the community, who had either actively resisted or quietly refused to raise their hand for Karen's version of events. Before the room cleared, I identified 9 names. 7 households who had submitted unanswered financial records requests. I'd spoken to 3 of them in the parking lot afterward, and they'd mentioned the others. And 1 more, a woman who caught up with me near the door as people were filing out. She said her father had been on the original HOA board, the one that had been seated in the early 90s, the one that had first adopted the Reservoir. She said he'd kept notes from those meetings. She said he was still alive and still local, and she thought he might be willing to talk. I had walked into that room with an attorney and a folder. I left it with 9 names and something I hadn't expected. If Karen had known what that woman said to me in the doorway, she would not have looked so composed walking to her car. The county courthouse smelled like old carpet and something institutional I couldn't name. I arrived 20 minutes early. My attorney and I took our seats at the respondent's table. Mr. Patterson settled into the gallery directly behind us, folder on his lap. Karen arrived with her attorney and 2 board members. She was dressed carefully. Navy blazer, deliberate composure. She set a portfolio on the plaintiff's table. Thick, organized. 30 years of documentation that she had built something, maintained something, invested in something, and that it therefore must be hers. I set a manila folder on our table. She glanced at it. The judge was methodical. She reviewed both parties' filings without comment for several minutes before she acknowledged anyone in the room. My attorney rose first. Your Honor, we'd like to begin with the foundational document. She passed copies to the bench and to opposing counsel. The deed to the parcel in question, 5,000 acres, including the reservoir and all surrounding land. Recorded chain of title, unbroken, going back to 1971. no recorded easement, no deed restriction, no covenant in the original subdivision plat granting any party operational rights over this land. The judge reviewed it without expression. HOA's attorney stood. Your Honor, the deed is not in dispute. The question is whether 30 years of open, continuous, and hostile use entitles the HOA to recognized operational rights regardless of what the deed says. The judge looked at him over her reading glasses. Is there a recorded easement? No, Your Honor. Is there a deed restriction? No, Your Honor. Is there a covenant in the subdivision documents granting the HOA rights over this parcel? A pause just long enough to notice. No, Your Honor. Then what we have, the judge said, is a use claim. Proceed. My attorney placed the second document on the bench. Your Honor, this is the demand letter sent to my client by HOA counsel prior to this filing. We'd direct the court's attention to page 7. She read the sentence aloud. The HOA's own attorney had written that the original landowner had been informed of and consented to the arrangement in a spirit of community goodwill. The room absorbed it. For adverse possession, my attorney continued, the use must be hostile, without the owner's permission. The HOA's own filing states the original owner was informed and consented. By their own written account, the use was permissive. Permissive use cannot ripen into adverse possession. It doesn't matter how many years it continues. HOA's attorney was already on his feet. Your Honor, that sentence is taken out of counsel. The judge raised one hand. The document is your filing. The words are your words. She looked back at my attorney. Continue. At the plaintiff's table, Karen wrote something on a notepad. I watched her press down harder than she needed to. Your Honor, we'd also like to enter the county building permit records for this parcel. My attorney handed the printout to the bench. The HOA has presented photographic evidence of structures built on this property. A gatehouse, a dock, a boat ramp, 2 storage sheds on the north bank. These structures have been cited as evidence of decades of investment in the lakefront. She let a moment pass. Not one of them has a building permit on file with the county. She read the list. Gatehouse, no permit. Dock, no permit. Boat ramp, no permit. Storage shed, north bank, west side, no permit. Storage shed, north bank, east side, no permit. The gallery went very quiet. The judge set down her pen. Counsel. She was looking at HOA's attorney now. I want to be precise. Are you arguing that the HOA has a legal right to operate a commercial enterprise on private property, charging fees to the public, constructing structures, running a business, without the landowner's consent and without a recorded instrument of any kind? The silence lasted long enough to be its own answer. No, Your Honor. His voice had lost something. We're arguing the equities. The community has relied on this access for 30 years, and to remove it would cause... The equities are not before me today. The judge's voice was not unkind. It was simply final. The question before me is legal right. You have now confirmed there is none. My attorney placed the last documents on the bench. 10 years of publicly filed HOA tax returns. The recreational amenity revenue line item visible on every page. Mr. Patterson's 25 annual HOA statements, the lakefront amenity fee printed and itemized on each one. The calculation, 200 households, 30 years. Conservative estimate of $680,000 collected from access to land the HOA had no legal right to commercialize. No one at the plaintiff's table said anything. The judge ruled from the bench. Adverse possession claim denied. The use had been permissive, not hostile, as established by the HOA's own written filing. No prescriptive rights had accrued. The fraudulent lien on narrator's title, voided immediately. Sanctions issued against HOA counsel for filing a knowingly baseless encumbrance. HOA ordered to cease all commercial operations on the property within 30 days. A separate civil proceeding to be calendared on 3 matters. Damages, mandatory removal of all unpermitted structures at the HOA's sole expense, and a potential unjust enrichment claim for the $680,000. Karen was staring at the table in front of her. Her attorney gathered his papers without looking at the gallery. Outside on the courthouse steps, a group of residents who had come to observe were waiting. Karen walked out behind her attorney and stopped at the top of the steps. She straightened. She looked at the people gathered below her and drew a breath. "We will appeal," she said. "This community's access to the lakefront is not..." "Margaret?" The voice came from the middle of the group. A woman who had been paying the lakefront amenity fee for 12 years. She said it quietly, just the name. "Where did the money go?" Karen looked at her. She didn't answer. 3 people stepped back from where Karen was standing. Not dramatically, not in a rush, just back. A small, visible thing in the afternoon light on the steps of the county courthouse. I shook my attorney's hand. I nodded to Mr. Patterson. He nodded back once. I didn't address the crowd. I didn't say anything to Karen. I got in my car and drove to the reservoir. The contractors arrived on a Monday morning, 3 weeks after the ruling. I didn't need to be there, but I was. Four-man crew, county permits in hand, the HOA listed as the responsible party for every line item on the work order. The gatehouse came down first. Took most of the morning. The foundation piers had been poured deeper than I'd expected, which told me someone had built that structure intending it to last. By mid-afternoon, the dock was gone, then the boat ramp, then the 2 storage sheds on the north bank, which turned out to contain 2 decades of accumulated equipment. Folding chairs, a retired kayak rack, a waterlogged registration box with a year's worth of daily pass stubs still inside. Final removal bill, $95,000, every cent charged to the HOA. The reserve fund didn't survive it. By the time the civil proceeding was calendared, damages, unjust enrichment, the $680,000, the HOA's legal defense costs had already exceeded $200,000. 2 law firms, 6 months of proceedings, the court sanction against their original counsel. The new assessment notice went out to all 200 households the following month. Dues increasing by $340 per year for the next 3 years, allocated entirely to legal costs and reserve replenishment. The lakefront amenity fee line item, the one that had appeared on every annual HOA statement since the early 90s, was no longer on the statement. There was nothing left to charge for. The HOA's insurance carrier launched an internal review of board conduct shortly afterward. Someone was now requiring answers to questions that had gone unanswered for 30 years. 2 board members resigned within 3 weeks of the ruling. No statements, just letters, filed quietly, effective immediately. Karen's resignation came a month later. 3 sentences, personal health reasons. She thanked the community for the privilege of service. She wished the HOA well. 30 years of entrenched authority, 3 sentences and a signature. The new board was elected at an emergency session that drew 178 of 200 households, the largest attended meeting in the community's recorded history. Their first official act was a written letter of apology to me, signed by all 5 newly elected members, and a formal resolution to open an inquiry into whether any portion of the $680,000 could be returned to the households that had paid the lakefront fee over the years. The new board president opened that first meeting with something I was told about afterward, secondhand. "We owe our neighbor an apology," she said, "and we owe ourselves some honesty about what was done here." The room, I was told, was quiet in a way it hadn't been in a very long time. The new board approached me about a formal easement arrangement shortly after, a proper one this time, recorded, negotiated, legally sound. They proposed a non-exclusive community access agreement for recreational use of the reservoir. I declined the commercial version. What I offered instead was a limited recorded agreement, non-commercial, no fees, no gatehouse, no boom gate. Residents could still come to the water, they simply would not be charged for it by anyone. The recorded instrument is 4 pages long. It names me as the sole property owner. It grants non-commercial access by my consent, a consent that can be revised if the terms are ever violated. It is the arrangement that should have existed 30 years ago. I drove out to the reservoir on a Tuesday morning, about 6 weeks after the ruling. Same gravel road, same angle of light through the tree line in the early hours. The gatehouse was gone, foundation ground down and resurfaced, the concrete edge already softening with new grass coming through the corners. The boom gate was gone. The fee schedule sign, $15 day access, $180 season pass, $25 boat launch, was gone. The only thing marking the entrance was a small wooden post with the parcel number burned into it, the same number that appears on the first line of the deed. I parked where I had parked the first day. I walked to the water. It was midweek, early, quiet. Nobody else there yet. The reservoir stretched out flat in the morning light, the far bank lined with old oaks that had been standing long before anyone built a gatehouse at the entrance. I stood at the edge for a while and thought about my grandfather, who paid property taxes on this land for 40 years and never once made a fuss about any of it. About the Pattersons, who told me they'd come down twice that week. Just walked in without stopping, without a card reader in their face, without $15 changing hands. About the 31 people who had raised their hands in that meeting room and voted no, without knowing the full story, without knowing each other, having simply decided, quietly and separately, that something was wrong. I stayed until the light changed. During the structure removal, one of the contractors had found a laminated document taped to the inside of the gatehouse window, HOA operating agreement for lakefront amenity management. The same document I had noticed through the glass on my very first visit, the one I had photographed without being able to read the body text. My attorney kept a certified copy in the case file. I kept the original. Not framed, not displayed, just flat in a drawer in my office. A document written by people who were absolutely certain they owned something that had never belonged to them. 30 years of certainty. One deed. And then the water, quiet, with nobody standing at the entrance asking for $15.